My hair is gross. Now my face is gross as well. I am gross. I'm just a gross kind of human today. Hi, I think it's time that we did another book review because it's been a while since we did a book review, and the reason for that is that I've been waiting for the moment when I was brave enough to do this. So in case you couldn't tell, I'm going to be giving you my review of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I will give you a brief synopsis of this book before jumping into my review. If you already know the synopsis or you don't care for the synopsis, there'll be a timestamp down below for you to skip ahead to the actual review part. The Name of the Wind is the first book in the Kingkiller series by Patrick Rothfuss. It's basically a fantasy series based around the main character Kvothe, who is telling his life story from the time of childhood through to the time of the present day. And the reason why Kvothe is telling his story is because he is one of this particular fantasy land's most notorious wizards. But a few years before this story begins, he disappeared, went into hiding, and people aren't sure whether he's dead or whether he's still alive. He's just gone off the radar and no one knows why. And then someone comes along who is like, I will share your life story if you tell it to me. And after quite a while of deliberation, Kvothe is like, okay, I will tell you my story. So it's kind of got these two segments to it where Kvothe is in the present day telling the story to the people who are listening to him, and also it switches then into the actual story that he's telling from the time that he was a child up until around 15 or 16 years of age. So that is a very basic summary of what the Kingkiller Chronicles and what The Name of the Wind is about. But let's jump on into my categories. First up, let's talk about the setting. The setting is one of the reasons why I particularly enjoyed this book. The environment and the descriptions of the environment, the places and the people are very atmospheric and very picturesque. There were a few things that I did not like about the way that Patrick Rothfuss handled the setting in this book. In particular, this is high fantasy. This is an entirely new fantasy world that we've just been thrown into, and there wasn't really much background building or information that was given to you as the reader about that world and how it operated. And for quite a while, I was very confused because of that. Even when I finished the book, I didn't really feel like I understood the world as fully as I wanted to. And I know that there is a balancing act that occurs when you're writing high fantasy between the plot and the world building and making sure that you're spending the right amount of time on each. You don't want to be overwhelmed with world building at the expense of the plot. However, I feel like he kind of went a bit too far towards the plot in that balance between plot and world building, and he could have afforded to give just a little bit more information about, maybe a bit more about the history of it and why the world is the way it is. And because of that, I'd probably give it maybe a 3.5 star rating for the setting. Next up, let's talk about the characters. So obviously the main character is Kvothe, and Kvothe is very divisive in terms of whether people love him or hate him. The fascinating thing about Kvothe as a character is the fact that he seems to have this innate ability to learn. He's consequently very good at a lot of the things he does, and people kind of don't like Kvothe because they're like, he's too good at everything. The reason why I liked that in him as a character was because it wasn't actually that he was good at everything. He was good at learning things, and so as a consequence he ended up being good at the things that he tried to learn. But he was still flawed. What he had in terms of like the ability to learn things, he lacked in the wisdom and the development because he's still a child, and he was still childlike and quite naive. That being said, the side characters were very two-dimensional. So he has friends at the university that you don't get to know anything about. You don't see their goals, their motives, their flaws. They never get rounded out at all, except that they're people that Kvothe knows. The people that he's telling the story to in the present day are the same. They're literally just props for him to tell the story to. Even the love interest herself, there is a love interest in this story, and she, to me, felt very much like the fantasy version of a manic pixie dream girl, rather than actually being a particularly interesting or deep character in herself. So that kind of disappointed me, but on the whole, I really enjoyed reading about Kvothe himself, and because of that, I would give the characters in this book a 4-star rating. So finally, we will be talking about the plot. So we are talking about Kvothe's life, and so there's not really necessarily an arc that is happening here. It's kind of just a sequence of events and a memoir of what happens. There are some arcs that do happen. In particular, there's like this one setup of what happens to him as a child that leads to him having a life purpose and this one goal that he's working towards in his life. He has goals and he has a goal that he's working towards, but that goal isn't achieved by the end of this book. This book kind of just cuts off at a particular point that is very arbitrary in terms of like the sense of the story. It's just kind of like, okay, this is the end of day one of the storytelling, we'll continue it tomorrow. There was a split between the sort of first 2/3 and the second 2/3 of the book where it happened very slowly up until a point, and then the final third I actually read in one night because it does pick up and we do get like one major conflict that happens that Kvothe then has to overcome. So it's not like a complete just kind of sequence of events with a random cutoff date. It's not quite like Lord of the Rings, but in general it was very much just a life memoir. Very much relies on you following along the thread of the story in the next book, because his life is in no way complete and neither is his goal and his priorities and things that he's trying to achieve. There were bits of the plot that kind of didn't make sense. In particular, the actual climax was a little bit odd. I'm not going to say any more than that because I'll spoil it, but it was a bit of an odd kind of choice of thing that happened that I was kind of like, wait, what? It didn't quite fit the vibe of the rest of the book that was going on. It was a bit absurd, and because of that I would give the plot a 4 out of 5 star rating rather than like a top rating. I don't need to talk about themes here because it didn't feel like there were any themes for me to talk about, but I will quickly talk about the writing. This is actually Patrick Rothfuss's debut novel, which is astonishing to think because it is a huge piece of work and it is also a beautifully written piece of work. The way he wrote descriptions of not only places but people, and the way that people looked and the way that people moved was very poetic and very well written and very beautifully phrased. And I think that is one of the reasons why I really enjoyed reading this book, even though it was quite slow paced and even though the world building was at times a little bit sparse. It made up for that in its writing sense and in the fact that the writing was so incredibly beautiful and so articulate and so ornate in its scripting. It was a really lovely and really well written read. So I would definitely give it 5 out of 5 stars in terms of the writing. It was just a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing to read. So overall, this would average out to being a 4-star read, maybe a 4.5 star. But yeah, so definitely one of my top reads of the year. I think 4 stars it seems pretty fair enough for me. I think I accidentally gave it 5 stars on Twitter, but that was before I actually sat down and figured out what my ratings were gonna be. So if you haven't read The Name of the Wind, I would recommend it to you if you're the kind of person who likes Lord of the Rings, maybe, with that kind of like slow-paced story with lots of descriptions in between. I would warn you that the character is a love or hate him kind of character, so just be aware of that. A lot of people that I know whose opinion on books I really respect have said that they didn't like The Name of the Wind because they didn't like the character. It's the kind of thing that if you don't like him, it's going to turn you off the whole book. But I did, and other people that I know really did as well, and they, like me, loved the book. I will see you in some other video very shortly, I'm sure, and until then, as always, stay classic.
Sit there and count your little fingers. Unhappy little girl blue.